Welcome to another BrewCon London Brew Talk. BrewCon London is the UK's largest homebrew expo and convention. The BrewCon Brew Talk videos are sponsored by the Malt Miller.
Okay, hi, I'm Fabian Clark. As Simon said, I'm from Muntons. One of my colleagues, Erica, was supposed to be doing this presentation, so I've sort of written a different one, so I'm not Erica. And it's not about multicolored beer. I'm doing lager because it's probably my passion, and we've seen quite a bit of lager come through in craft brewing and in home brewing over the last few years. It's become quite popular to make because of the inherent difficulties of making a very clean, crisp, dry beer. And that's why I thought I'd talk about it. I've got quite a bit of information. It's potentially quite technical. Hopefully everyone's interested in that.
They start to glaze over.
Yeah, if they glaze over, I'll talk about something else, or just jump around a bit. So starting off, when you do a lager, there's sort of three key aspects you're looking for. You want something fairly dry, something very, very crisp, and you want a really clean aftertaste. You don't really want loads and loads of like diacetyl or estery aromas in there. So I'm basically going to break down the way to make lager, in my opinion, in three steps. The first one being mashing. I'll go through a lot of mashing. Then we'll go through some fermentation, and I'll just touch on conditioning at the end, especially as conditioning in homebrew is fairly difficult unless you've got a lot of kit. So we'll start off. First thing in mashing, of course, is going to be enzymes. Sorry that a lot of this is in German, because my books are all in German, but I'll speak in English and that'll make more sense. So I'm just highlighting here the important enzymes. Of course, the two first ones everyone thinks about when brewing anything really is alpha and beta amylase. As you can see, they run at both have an optimum at 65 degrees, which unsurprisingly is why every infusion mashing system starts off with a 65-degree rest for about an hour. What I would like to delve into is there are quite a few different ways of mashing where you're actually not only going to focus on those two enzymes but on some other ones. So if we continue, I'm just going to look at two different mash profiles. The one at the bottom is basically the very typical optimized mashing profile used in single infusion breweries. The slight step you have there is when you start sparging and the temperature rises. But basically you mash in 63 to 65 degrees, let your enzymes chew, and then you heat up with your hot sparge water to help saccharification, and you go into your wet boil. On the top is the very, very traditional, brewing or mashing profile I learned back in Germany, which is German standard infusion, not single infusion, where we start off at about 50 degrees. The main reason we do that in anywhere outside of the UK is malt tends to be pretty crap. It used to be pretty crap, and the UK was a lot better at malting, which is the reason why we started at lower temperatures. That lower temperature step in the UK isn't really necessary, or with British malt it isn't necessary, just because of the better modification. Will's just joined. If I do anything wrong on malt, he'll call me out on it.
That's not why I've come down to listen to it.
But yeah, these are two very traditional, or the traditional sort of mashing profiles used for lager beer. So you start off with you have a 60-degree rest, and then you raise up to 72. So you separately use beta amylase first, and then alpha amylase afterwards, getting really good conversion. Next up, we'll have a look at something that I've only ever seen outside of the UK, which is decoction mashing. This is my favourite technique for mashing. It takes a bit of time. It's really easy when doing homebrew because most people will have a mash vessel and something to boil in, and especially a lot of time, which makes this really easy. And what this does is you split out the main mash and about a third of the liquor. So you let it run through the grains, pull it out after about 20 minutes, and you heat it up to 72 to start your alpha amylase chewing, giving you loads and loads and loads of free ends on the sugar molecules so that the beta amylase is faster. Boil it up, and when you return it back, that boiled liquid actually heats up the rest of the mash. So you can do step mashing without having all the fancy gear and having a mash tun that actually can heat up. And if you want to go full extreme, we have the next slide, which is triple mashing. I've only known one brewer to do that on a commercial scale in the 20th century. And they only do it for one beer because it's an absolute pain. It takes, as you can see, 360 minutes just to mash the beer. And this is basically doing decoction mashing, but you start at 35, 36 degrees and let it sit, boil some up, raise it to about 50 degrees, let it sit, boil it up, and it just takes a long time, but you get really, really heavy, or really, really good body in the beer while getting very good fermentable sugar profiles. And just keeping all of these mash profiles in mind, I'll explain why standard decoction mashing is probably my favorite for good lager production. And to visualize that, we'll go to the next slide, which is a lot of numbers. And it's basically focusing on the effect of time, temperature, thickness, and pH on your enzymes inside of your mash. I've actually highlighted one here, which is called limit dextranase. That is probably the key enzyme to making really good, dry, and crisp lagers. And limit dextranase, the key that it is it breaks down all of the residual dextrin structures left after alpha and beta amylase have broken down the starch into sugar. All of that dextrin will give you a lot of some residual sweetness, sort of the typical final gravity that you'd be used to brewing ales is about 10-10. With lagers, you're aiming more towards the 10-4 range, and to get that low, you of course need to break down all of those dextrins. So limit dextranase is the key. And you can see the mash temperatures for limit dextranase about 60 to 63, even lower in some cases, about 55. But that's fairly key in this process. Then there's another aspect of pH and its effect on your enzymes. And you can see on the right-hand side that beta amylase's effectivity changes with different mash pHs. And as you can sort of see, the further you go down on that list, the higher the pH gets, and the effectivity of the enzyme actually rapidly drops. As you can see, it's sort of 5.8, you're already only at 85%. In comparison, if you make the mash slightly more sour than it needs to be, so if you're not on 5.5, if you're at 5.2, you're still going to get about 99%, which is really good. So you get a lot of your enzyme activity without, and you also boost some other enzymes without taking any away from the beta amylase. And then that third graph is a bit hard to read. On the side, so going upwards, we have the enzyme activity, especially beta amylase, and at the bottom we have the time at 65 degrees. And the three different graphs show the effect of the mash thickness. So you've got a 2-to-1, a 3-to-1, and a 4-to-1 mash. And the 2-to-1 is right at the top and actually shows how much longer your enzymes actually stay effective in a very thick, grain-heavy mash. And all of these aspects together tie into getting different sugar profiles and getting different lengths of enzyme activity. So if we go back to the thought on decoction mashing that I was talking about, where you're taking a third of the liquid out, you're actually making that mash thicker. And by doing that, you're increasing the efficacy of your enzymes, because of course you're not breaking them down as fast. Sort of a bit like a herd tolerance. The more of them that are there at the same time, the less they break down in temperature. And by taking some of the liquid out, you're actually increasing their activity, so you're getting more conversion while not really having to do much else to change temperatures or pHs. What you can also do is, now you're taking the third out, you can actually change the mash pH in thick mash, so you can drop it down to about 5.1, which is limit dextranase's optimum pH level, keep it at a low temperature, but run the other part that's predominantly liquid at different temperatures, and then when you bring it all back, your mash pH, because of course the liquid you've taken out has a higher pH, will go back into the range where beta amylase is very, very effective, and you're not going to have to worry about distorting your enzyme effectivity. We then continue. We get a different sugar profile based on these temperatures, and this again highlights what limit dextranase does. So you've got 60, 65, and 70 degree mash here, and you've got different sugar profiles, and the key number is the line at the bottom, the dextrins. So again, dextrins, non-fermentable sugars. The level of dextrins drops to about 20% if you mash at 60 degrees in comparison to mashing at 65 degrees, you've got 24%. So you're going to get 4% more fermentation or attenuation level without adding any enzymes in your in the fermenters or having to add sugar or something to increase that. And by doing that, you basically can sort of play around with, again, sugar profile, how much body does the beer have, what kind of lager am I making? Am I making a traditional Pilsner where I want it to be really, really dry, then I'm going to boost the period of time between 60 and 65 degrees, so low temperature. Whereas if you're going to go for something a little more adventurous like a double lock, you probably don't want to do that because you don't want it fermenting out all the way, because you're going to need some body and residual sugars just to balance out the 7-8% alcohol in there. And then I'll continue on again. This sort of highlights it a little further. All of this again in German, sorry about that. Maybe someone could read it. Where you've got on the far left highlighted the mashing temperatures, and then the other list I've highlighted is the percentage of attenuation achieved. And you can actually see directly the highest attenuation level is at 63 degrees of mash temperature. Again, boosting limit dextrinase, so you're getting all of those dextrins broken down and getting a very nice dry beer. You wouldn't, again, want to do that in a quite heavy beer because you want some of that body, but as soon as you want to do something dry, it works really well in American pale ales as well, just to, again, help them dry out a little further and also take away maybe some of the malt forward taste, let them sort of expensive yeast and hops shine a little more. That's most of what I was going to talk about mashing. We can continue.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is that with a simple infusion mash?
So all of the last one's based on just set it at a certain temperature, and so you'll still get even. It's a very good question because of course you can, if we go back to that slide, you can actually see even if you just mash straight at 50 degrees, you'll get some conversion. The enzymes will do their job at the wrong temperature. But what you can also see is if you mash at 80 degrees, the enzymes aren't really going to do much because it's a bit warm and they're not going to like it a lot. But it will still take the enzymes a couple of minutes at 80 degrees to completely break down. So you'll still get some conversions, just a really low number. Okay. So basically we're just going to go back here. We've got the table of enzymes out of my favourite book. That's too hard. And as you can see, I've still got the alpha and beta amylase highlighted, but if we drop down by 2, we have, it says dense dextrinase, but it means limit dextrinase here, where we have a 55 to 60 degree optimum and 5.1 pH optimum. So back to what I was sort of saying, in decoction you would be able to mash in at a 5.5 pH, so to continue, I can sort of highlight that. So we mash in at 5.6 to 5.5, so traditional mashing pH, mash in 63 degrees, optimum. So it's a little high for the dextrinase, but it's low enough that the dextrinase actually still is going to do its job. And what you can now do, this would be just a very standard mash, is take a third out, drop the pH on part of it, and then increase it. At the bottom as well, if you want to take a picture of it, is my calculations on pH adjustments on the amount of lactic acid at a certain percentage needed to sort of adjust malt pHs throughout. You don't only have to do this with lactic acid. If you're doing it at home, it actually works quite well with malt vinegar. You just sort of need to work out how high the percentage of acid in the malt vinegar is beforehand. Well, some people are very particular about only using malt, so you could use malt vinegar, that sort of works. But yeah, so you could adjust mash pH within your mash and have 2 separate pHs running, so you've got 2 sets of enzymes doing the job at the same time. Okay, after mashing, the next big key in, of course, lager production is fermentation. There are 4 main sort of fermentation techniques used in lager production that I adhere to. They're listed here. I'll also be showing some profiles of how the fermentation will look. And basically, you sort of differentiate between the front and back end of fermentation, what temperatures you're running at. So there's a cold, warm fermentation, where you're going to start off between 8 and 9 degrees, slowly let it rise to maybe 10 degrees, and then your conditioning period is actually quite warm, or secondary fermentation at about 12 degrees. Sounds pretty difficult to do at home because most people, again, haven't got anything at home to sort of cool down a keg or a fermenter to 9 degrees for a week. So it's slightly difficult. It's very, very typical in very traditional breweries on the continent. If you continue to the cold fermentation, it's the most difficult one to do at home, unless it's winter, because you basically ferment and condition at a maximum of 6 degrees. So you just leave it outside throughout the winter, and by the time winter's over, you've got really, really nice beer, but you've not got anything while you're waiting. It takes a long time to do this one because, of course, it's very cold. But what it does do is the really cold temperatures stop the yeast from producing any kind of ester, so you get a really dry, crisp flavour profile. And then the two on the bottom right-hand side are the ones that I tend to use in homebrewing. One is cold targeted fermentation, which is a little more fun. And then there's cold or warm cold fermentation, where you, which is the easiest one to do at home. Cold targeted, to just start off, is basically you ferment normally. As soon as you hit about 10-12, 10-10, you add some Schweitzer or Kreuzen to your fermenting beer. So basically fresh wort with a little more yeast in it. You can even just use malt extract or dry malt extract, or make some more wort if you're brewing again. And take some of that, add some yeast, basically have a little yeast starter going, and you add that back in, so you've got fresh yeast going, and that sort of helps get your secondary fermentation going. It really cuts down on fermentation time and conditioning, because it only takes about 7 days to then condition out the beer and get a really, really good product, because of course you've got fresh yeast doing the job again. The warm cold fermentation is the traditional craft brewer's lager. Most craft brewers, when they start out, don't have cooling facilities to get stuff down to 7 degrees, 9 degrees straight off the wort boiler, and most homebrewers don't either. So they'll use a warmer fermentation at 12 to 15 degrees, which again is recommended on a lot of the yeast sachets, because yeast suppliers, of course, understand people at home don't have great big massive ammonia chillers sort of flying about. So it's the easiest one to do, and you then basically have to just do a slightly extended cooling conditioning period at a cold temperature. And if we go, we'll be able to go through the different profiles now. So the first one, just click. So the first one, this is a cold fermentation, where we basically have a line here, which is our temperature, where we have a fairly low temperature in the way again. We have a very low temperature to start off, and basically keep it very low throughout the entire process, and let it rise as soon as we get a diacetyl spike. You get a diacetyl spike about at a gravity of about 10-12. That's where the maximum level of diacetyl will have been made by 90% of lager yeasts, and then you start chilling it down, warming it up to break down all that diacetyl, so you do a traditional diacetyl roast. Next after that would be a purely cold fermentation, where, as you can see on the temperature curve here, it hits 9 degrees, and that was it. It stays at 9 degrees, and as soon as we again get to our diacetyl spike, we start cooling, and traditional brewers will cool it in 1 to 2 degrees Celsius per day, so your yeast doesn't get a shock, because of course if you jam the cooling on full blast, the yeast's not going to be happy. It's the same as if the heater in here starts working and then all of a sudden it starts raining outside. None of us are going to be too happy about it. So basically you jam the cooling on over a longer period of time, and it takes up to 21 days of just secondary fermentation before your conditioning period can even start. And then if we go to the last two profiles, so first off the targeted one, where you can sort of see a little spike in the gravity line, so the green one at the back, and the blue line, which is the diacetyl line. You get this spike where you are adding some more sugar back in with some fresh yeast, and it will basically start fermentation again, break down the diacetyl a lot quicker, and you can see the total production time for this kind of lager is 21 days. So you can mash, and 3 weeks later you've got your lager ready to go, all done, no more work. And then the optimized version, or what big massive lager brewers do, is this technique, and this is typically also the craft beer technique, where we ferment at a higher temperature. So here they're holding the fermentation temperature about 12 degrees. You get a very rapid spike in diacetyl, of course, because the warmer temperature is increasing diacetyl buildup and other esters. And then you basically, as soon as your gravity stops moving, you just jam the cooling on and then wait. There's a lot of waiting involved in lager. In my opinion, it's a bit of a misnomer that people say it takes about 6 weeks to make good lager. It just takes as long as it takes. As soon as it's in the conditioning period, the best tip to anyone trying to make a lager is taste it every day or every other day. and as soon as you're happy with the flavour profile, it's done. It's a lot easier than having a fixed time period. There are calculations for that, so if we continue, we'll go into conditioning and have a look at those. So the whole point of conditioning a lager is to then clean up anything that is sort of, any slight off flavour that's in there, because well, there's nothing there to mask anything. So you want to get all of the old dead yeast off the beer. As soon as it's at about 10, 12, 10, 10, you want to transfer it to a different vessel, get it off all of that yeast that is now just not doing anything, and we'll start going into autolysis and adding off flavours again. You don't really want that in the beer. Also, what you want to be doing is adding fresh yeast, so that fresh yeast will then start creating more CO2 and bubbling out all the off flavours out of the beer. So you're basically washing it by stripping all the off flavours out and volatiles out with CO2. And you can then also carbonate it, of course, by doing that, and you can get it to sort of sediment out and become fairly clear. That sedimentation period is debated on how long it takes. The last slide will actually show my version of calculating how to do that. I hope no one wants to check my math on it. This first is my way of working out how long conditioning has to be. So traditionally, my original rule is just try it, and then as soon as you're happy with it, you're good to go. But if you're going to do something like the warm and then cold fermentation, the easiest way to do that at home is run your fermentation at about 15 degrees, and as soon as you hit 10, 12, add some fresh yeast starter slurry into it, give it about a day, and then bottle the whole lot and just chuck all the bottles into a fridge, because that's the easiest way to keep it fairly cold. And run secondary fermentation in the fridge. But of course, if you now start trying one bottle a day, you're not going to have much left at the end of it. So instead of that, there's a calculation here that I've sort of translated out of Plato's into understandable units. And basically, my recommendation is per SG point, you do 2 days. So if you bottled at 10-12, give it 24 days. And in 24 days, you should be good to go. Open one, you'll be happy. And that'll help crisp it all out. Because, of course, you're doing all of that conditioning in a bottle, when you open the bottle, all of those volatiles that you've stripped out of the beer are going to be in the top of the neck. So you'll open the bottle, it'll smell really, really DMSy and sulfury, and then it won't. It'll just be, you open it and go, oh, Jesus, that's shit. Pour it and it'll be fine. And then the next slide, as I said, is, oh no, sorry, I forgot about this one. This is my carbonation table, where if you have pressurizable vessels at home, not many people do. I have seen a lot of people get seriously into homebrew that start having pressurizable vessels. This is where you can then start playing around with exact CO2 levels in the beer. So you can basically pick a temperature that you're doing your conditioning, which is the line on the top, and on the right hand side is temperatures. On the far left you have the CO2 concentration in the beer, and at the bottom you have your pressure, top pressure. And you can basically say, if I want to condition at 8 degrees, blue line, and I want 4 grams per litre of carbonation, which is a fairly mild level of carbonation, you could go all the way up to 5, 6 grams. 6 grams is pretty aggressive. So I normally pick 4 grams. You need 0.66 bars of top pressure to actually do that. So it's not huge. It's not like you're going to need sort of some kind of rocket to actually do this kind of pressure fermentation. You just need a little tiny bit of pressure. It's fairly easy to sort of hodgepodge or MacGyver yourself some kind of system to put on top of most fermenters that will hold 0.6 bars of pressure. The more difficult bit, again, is consistently keeping it at 8 degrees, or if you want to do the red line, you only need 0.2 bars, but you need to keep it at 0 degrees for 25 days, which is a bit more difficult. And then last part conditioning is, of course, clearing the beer. And this is where my fun math comes in. If anyone wants to try it, have a go.
There's an error.
I actually checked it on the way in this morning. I think I'm pretty right on it. So basically, this is how you calculate how long it's going to take for your beers to clear out. Basically, you work out size of a yeast cell, which is about 5 to 10 microns. It's in a lot of books. I've just based it around 5 to 10 microns here. And you can then work out how far that yeast cell will travel in sedimentation over a certain period of time. And I've just pulled out a few here at the bottom based on a 3-meter fermenting vessel, where if you're doing 10 microns, it'll take 26 days and all of the 10 micron particles will be gone. Of course, if you want to do sort of cold sterile filtration by waiting, it takes about 7.2 years for 1 micron particles to sediment out, but they will sediment out. You just need a lot of patience. And if you translate all of this to sort of 20 centimeter tall, 0.3 litre long neck bottles, that means it'll take about 6 days, just under 6 days, to clear out all the 10 micron particles. So after 10 days, the beer is not going to be completely clear, but it's going to be pretty bright. And 5 micron particles will take about 21 days. And then they'll all be gone, and then the beer looks really clear. So why would you wait any longer than that, really? Yeah, so that's basically all of my sort of ramblings on lager production. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've got any questions, go ahead.